Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is Popeye. It's down the rabbit hole. Today I have a special guest. Her name is Judyth Vary Baker. You've all heard me talk about her many times. She is the real deal. She is 100% accurate with what she says. And her story doesn't get the airtime or the attention that it needs. And neither does the truth about Lee Harvey Oswald. So today, we're going to get into the truth, and you're going to get to hear Judith's story and the stuff that the media doesn't tell you about Lee. They try to make him a monster, but in all reality, Lee Oswald was not a monster. He was a really average, everyday person just like you and me, and he had a big heart, and he was really a good person. And that's the side of Lee Oswald that I want everybody to get to know. So without further ado, Judyth, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for doing this interview.
Well, I appreciate it, Popeye, and it's because it's you that it's happening.
Well, you are an amazing person, and I just, I know that this really is, you can't do this, you can't do interviews on the, normally because your life has been put in danger because of the information that you have come forth with. So I appreciate that you taking, personal risk to speak to the audience and get your story and Lee's story out today. You have courage, and you are an example of what the people in this country should do. You give me hope. So, and you give me, it's nice to see that people go through, hell and still have the courage to stand up and speak truth to power. So you deserve a big thumbs up and, a collective clap from the entire country for what you're doing.
Well, I think that all started when I heard that Abraham Lincoln walked several miles to return a tiny bit of money, and that kind of thing has always been my hero. You have to do what's right.
Exactly. And what's right in this case is getting your story out and the truth about Lee out. You tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got to meet Lee in New Orleans and kind of how you got to New Orleans. I understand how you got there. For the listeners, you have to check out Judith's book. It's called Me and Lee. You can go see it at meandlee.com. And please purchase the book. I like I said before on other shows, it's very important to get books and manuscripts and stuff like that because you are preserving history, and this is a definite piece of history that needs to be preserved. So go ahead, Judith.
Well, meeting Lee Oswald, I had no idea or concept, of course, of his existence or how important he would be in my life or anything like that. I was asked to come to New Orleans to assist in Dr. Mary Sherman, and cancer research work that she was doing. My book explains the very complex reasons why I went to New Orleans, and the fact that I had a man in my life who was very interesting to me, and I thought I had lost my faith at that time in God. Thank God that has been restored. I didn't believe that marriage was more than just a piece of paper, but you couldn't get birth control pills without it. This man had said if I would accept him, and he would come and meet me in New Orleans and marry me. So I had a real exciting summer coming up and spring. And I arrived in April of 1963 in New Orleans, and it was a culture shock because being alone wasn't so bad, but Dr. Ochsner, who had invited me, and Dr. Mary Sherman, they were out of town because I had come 2 weeks early. There had been a miscommunication because my university was on a trimester system that got out early. And I had nowhere to go, and I didn't want to go home. If you read the book, you'll see why. So when I arrived, I being someone who was highly educated in certain areas and pretty much a dum-dum when it came to adjusting to a life in a place like New Orleans, I was really at a loss. And sooner than later, I would have gotten myself into problems. Suddenly, this young man shows up. I'm at the post office, and I dropped something briefly, and when he picked it up, I thanked him in Russian, in a crude manner of speaking. I didn't know much Russian, but I liked to, at that time, use whatever language was in my head. So I did that, and he answered me in Russian, said it wasn't a good idea to speak Russian in New Orleans. I was shocked. I mean, I'd never met anybody who knew Russian, you know, and I was fascinated by the Russian culture. I'd read all the Russian masters. I was also very good in chess. And lo and behold, this man was the same. He was a good chess player. Not only did he know Russian, and he knew all these wonderful operas, and by heart he knew the Queen of Stage opera, for example, by heart. He'd read Dostoevsky and Pushkin and so on. Not only that, he'd lived in Russia. Can you imagine how I felt when I found out this man had lived in the USSR for almost 3 years? It didn't take a long period of time before I realized how very much I was attracted to him and what kind of a man he was. He was a very interesting and sensitive person, and a very brave man. He frankly ended up telling me that he was on a mission to try to kill Fidel Castro. He said when I asked him why he learned so many things about Castro and about Cuba, he could rattle off. He loved maps, and he could rattle off every bit of Cuba from one end to the other, and all the rivers and all the economic factors and all of the leaders they had. I asked him why he learned all that, and he said he was going to go to Cuba. I said, why? And he said, well, he wasn't going there to give Castro a medal. So I understood immediately, of course, that what he was involved in, considering everything else he told me. That was intriguing. I realized I was speaking to someone who had been a spy in Russia and in the USSR. So anyway, that's basically how we met.
And once you met him, he's the guy that introduced you to David Vary, correct?
Yeah, and some of my enemies online, I had approved one Dr. John Williams' outline of how all this happened, and he had placed a list of people under one day, Ochsner and Vary and so on. I didn't see them all that same day, but I certainly did meet Dr. David Vary, so-called doctor, the day after Lee and I met in New Orleans. I met him on April 26th, and we're talking about April 27th, and met him in the afternoon at a restaurant. That was quite an experience. Anybody who's ever seen Dave Vary would agree with me, put it that way. Quite an outstanding person in many ways, brilliant man. There's a biographer now, on the Oswald did it side, who contends that David Vary wasn't an unusual man, but anybody who really knew Vary would have had to disagree. This man never met Vary. Okay, so I'm writing a biography of David Vary because I like him very much. Some people think, well, okay, he was a homosexual and he was a pedophile and all that. It's true that he had a real problem with teenage boys, and there are a lot of people who condemn him for that. I look at the whole man, however, and see what else he was. He was a good patriot. He pretended to dislike Kennedy. At one point, he really was expressing hatred for Kennedy because of the Bay of Pigs matter. But later, when he realized that it wasn't Kennedy who was involved, that it was actually Nixon who had set up Bay of Pigs mess, and so on, he realized what Kennedy had done. That changed everything for Vary. And by the way, we have Mary Sherman and David Vary and me. So our joke was, it was Dr. Mary, Dr. Vary, and Dr. Vary, the three of us. Turned out they were working on a project, to try and they'd been working on it for a year, try and create a kind of a virus-laden cancer that would react quite rapidly when injected in someone's body. And they could develop it because it had lung cancer, and it would create lung cancer rapidly. The idea was to try and kill Castro with it without that way involving any country. Nobody could be blamed. Get rid of Castro using what looked like natural means. I would suspect today that a number of people who suddenly come up with cancer, like maybe Mr. Chavez, it may not be as normal or natural as it may look.
You just answered my question, my next question, without even me needing to ask it, because I was about to ask you, do you think that these world leaders and truth tellers, people like Bill Hicks, Aaron Russo, all these other people that come out and start to tell the truth about, reality and about the government, they all of a sudden always end up getting cancer. Dr. Catherine Albrecht, she talks about the RFID chips. All of a sudden she gets cancer. David Ray Griffin wrote like 10 books on 9/11. He was sick. I think it was cancer. So do you think that the research that you guys were working on is being used today in a weaponized form?
Well, as you know, I left that project due to my concerns, my ethical concerns, and before that they blackballed me forever from being in cancer research. So I cannot determine precisely when or where the materials went after that, except I know that some of them went to MD Anderson Hospital in Texas. We have later somebody filing a lawsuit that someone had tried to, or injected them with cancer cells. Ordinarily, this should not be any problem. The body would take a cancer cell and destroy it in short order and filter it out and destroy it. You'd have to be injected with a lot of ordinary cancer cells in order to make a difference. But when you see a lawsuit that's been placed against someone, because someone else injected them with cancer cells, you have to wonder if those were the same kind. These cells were very unusual. In 6 or 7 days, if you injected them into a compromised immune system, such as a newborn baby mouse, the tumors that would generate on that mouse would be the same weight as the mouse itself in a week. So that's how fast it could grow. And they would take this and the biggest tumors, the most vigorous ones, and they run them through again, and put radiation on them and so on. And again, any tumors that grew even faster, those would be selected. And that had been going on for a year. So you can imagine what we have today. That was back in the 60s.
Yeah, so, fast forward 40 years, I can only imagine what they've got today.
You have no concept of what they have today and the genetic manipulations and so on. I'll just put it this way. I would not accept a vaccine for anything, especially if I were a controversial person.
Yeah, I don't do vaccines. When I was in the military, I personally had my own experience with vaccines. After getting all the vaccines at boot camp, I developed Bell's palsy in the left side of my face for 3 months, and I still have residual side effects from it. So I don't play with vaccines at all. I don't do the flu shot. I don't do any of that crap.
Yeah, well, I think that that's why some people say it's not being fair that the rest of the population is taking all these risks so that you don't get the disease. But there are other ways to conquer these diseases. Most of them can be conquered, for example, with bacteriophage. You can't get TB if you have a really good bacteriophage fighting it. The bacteriophage, is used in sewage plants and so on. I mean, we have horrible diseases that go into sewage plants. Out comes nice, fresh, clean water. How do you think that happens? By miracles? It's not just chemicals. They use bacteriophage.
See, this is the stuff I'm talking about. It's like when they use the Italian guy. He's been using baking soda treatments. This Italian doctor, and he was able to clean out cancer out of the videos I saw. It was sinus, like the guy had sinus cavities. He had polyps all throughout his sinus cavities.
Well,
and they were
basically,
clean it out.
there are dozens of ways that cancer can be cured. Various different kinds of cancer. There's so many out there, but and I was just mentioning one particular way to handle it. There are a number of various therapies out there, but the problem is the traditional way is the way that makes money. You have huge industries built around, the radiation units. Think of all the people that'd be out of business if they didn't use radiation on cancer anymore, even though radiation actually causes cancer, and if you get too much exposure to it. And then you have, on top of that, you have all these very expensive chemotherapy regimens that you can go through. By the way, it's abysmal that the so-called cure rate, there are very, very few chemotherapy regimens that actually work. Very few.